I figured that I'd just keep reading to you so that next time we need to read this, we already have it. Fiona's still here. Still doesn't care because the birds are more interesting. When we left off, she had learned a lot about the Kinkers. They had had that fire before they left, so they had lost all of their supplies, which was kind of why they were stealing from everybody, but also their sons had died, so they were dealing with a lot of loss and sadness. And now it is July 7th, a Wednesday, and they're at Fort Bridger. This is as busy as Fort Laramie, but not as many Native Americans. Tall Joe pointed out the 2 mountain men who were stretching beaver pelts onto circular frames. That one fellow with the knife over there is named Kit Carson, the scout who helped find the trail to Oregon. And that fella, that's Jim Bridger himself. Tall Joe lifted his hat in greeting when the 2 saw him. Bridger started this trading post to help immigrants, and that's why it's outfitted with a blacksmith, horses, plenty of provisions, you name it. He's the first white man you'll see by that Salt Lake where the other people are headed. He's the first white man to see Salt Lake where the other people are headed. Tall Joe blew his nose into his hand and then wiped his fingers on his pants. He said, Jim Bridger has got a map of the entire western continent stored in his brain, every river, every mountain, every tree stump practically. We camped for 2 days at the fort outside the log walls. There are now tears among the women because here's where the trail splits for good. About 30 families are heading south to go to the California Trail, while the rest of us are going northwest for Oregon. Many friendships have been made over the past 3 months, extremely close friendships when you're traveling like this. I'm relieved that Pepper and I don't have to say goodbye to each other. Also, Mrs. Big, come here, for I've grown very fond of her. Aside from Aunt June, she's my favorite lady. Fort Bridger is also where we part ways with the other people that we've been following on the other side of the river. Hooray and good riddance, said Tall Joe. I watched that one fellow named Greenflake, climb into his wagon and take the reins. He waved at me and smiled, and then they were gone. Pa says the next year many of the wives and children will follow them. Jim Bridger has a Native American wife. I saw her with some other people on the sunny side of the fort, staking down deer hides. She was pretty and very young. I wanted to talk to her, but I didn't know what to say, so instead I just waved, Howdy! She looked down at her lap. Maybe she's just shy. Mrs. Anderson and Ma were by a creek washing our blankets. To wring them out, they stood 3 feet apart, each holding an end and twisting until all of the water dripped out. Aunt June spread them in the grass to dry, and when they saw me, they stopped talking, but I'd already heard them. They were saying that they'd be quite content just settling right here at Fort Bridger, never traveling again. There was water, great earth to plow, plenty of people, and all of our families were safe. Maybe Narcissa Whitman is braver than we are, Aunt June said. I don't know how she did this trail last year. Ma said, and who knows what's in Oregon? Who knows what will happen between now and then? There are Native Americans further north, and I'm sure there's more danger that Tall Joe ain't telling us about. The next day, Benny's arm is healing. Pa made another new splint so that it's easier for him to move. In other good news, it's that Wade is back to telling jokes. The only problems left from the hemlock is that his tongue is numb on the right side. Tall Joe says he probably didn't eat very much of it, but Ma says it is an absolute miracle that's all there is to it. Just a miracle. Mrs. Big called me over this morning before we pulled out from Fort Bridger. As she folded their blankets into a crate, she said, Hattie, Mr. Big's cart is missing. Someone took it in the night. Kind of like the way he travels, because he has no legs. At noon, I helped Mrs. Big make a search of camp. She's so large that her steps are slow. The first wagon we went to was the Kinkers. I don't know what you're talking about, Mrs. Kinker said, and how dare you accuse us? We're just poor old people. Besides, I'm not feeling well. Neither is my husband. Maybe everyone would like it if we just plumb keeled over and died before we get to Oregon. Maybe you'd be happy then. Mrs. Big held up her hand. That's enough, she said. Go back to your nap, Mrs. Kinker. Sorry to bother you. When we were out of hearing distance, I said, if Mrs. Kinker's so innocent, why did she make excuses for herself, and why ain't she upset to hear somebody stole Mr. Big's cart? Hattie, if she's a thief, then soon enough she'll make a mistake and folks will find her out. It's not like she can leave town or hide. Mrs. Big rested a heavy hand on my shoulder. Be patient, honey. Afternoon. After a long pull up a creek called the Muddy River, we've come to the Bear River. There's a beautiful campsite with a trail coming in from the night. A piece of paper was nailed to a tree. Tall Joe read it first, then passed it around. "They made it, folks," he shouted. "The other wagons made it across the desert, and just a few days ahead of us, it seems like." Cheers went up. Our horses, mule, oxen, and cattle are grazing along the broad river bottom. It's the most peaceful sight. Groups of men are fishing or sitting in the sun or exploring the meadows. There's the sound of children splashing and playing along the river. The women are spreading washed clothes on the bushes and also sitting in the sun, talking and resting. Some are busy cooking over the fires. Now, it's not just Ma and Aunt June and Mrs. Anderson talking about going no further, but several other families are discussing the very same thing. Why not settle here in beautiful Bear River Valley? At supper, 5 families made an announcement. This place suits them so well that they've decided to homestead, and said that they'd not seen finer farmland ever. But Pa wants to keep going. He is so set on Oregon and living by the Pacific Ocean that he can't think of anything else. Pa said he's had too many dreams that were lost or forgotten that he just gave up on. This is our chance, Augusta, to fulfill a dream as big as Oregon. Just stand by me. I need you to. Ma says all she dreams of is keeping her family safe, and as for me, my dream is that Pepper and I will always be friends, and that I'll someday have a husband too. Maybe Pepper and I can still live next door. So, we're on the trail again. 10 days until we get to the next fort, Fort Hall. I'll read a couple more. Sheep Rock. One side of Sheep Rock rises up like a stone wall. Pine trees surround it on all sides, and among the cliffs are mountain sheep. Tall Joe said that back in 1942, John C. Fremont explored this place and named it Sheep Rock. We're still on the Bear River. It's the same beautiful green as Benny's eyes, and when we saw how deep it is, we were relieved to learn that it makes a sharp turn south so we don't have to cross it. Tall Joe says it empties into the Great Salt Lake. He followed it once. An amazing sight has made us all want to camp for several days. There are pools bubbling up with hot water. There's even a geyser called Steamboat because somehow it makes a high-pitched whistle that sounds just like a boat on the Missouri. Hearing it made me so happy yet homesick that I almost started bawling. Folks are swimming and floating in the wonderful warm water and drinking it. But to me, it smells like eggs on the rotten side. But it doesn't taste bad. Wade and Gideon dared each other to sit on the geyser. They took turns, and oh, what an event. While Pepper and I watched from the banks, Gideon swam out to the center and he waited. Soon enough, heavy bubbles began lifting him up and up and up, and his arms and legs waved like a turtle's on his back as the geyser bounced him up and down. By the time it stopped, Gideon had lost his shirt from the pressure. Wade rose the geyser next, and he lost his shirt too. Everybody was erupting in a hilarious laughter, and the day went on like that. I was so pleased. We lay in the grass and we stared up at the clouds. Later. At supper, Ma stirred several cups of sugar and a pint of raspberries into a pail of mineral water. Mrs. Big did the same with citrus syrup to make some lemonade, and they had the most delicious bubbly drinks any of us had ever tasted. Pepper and I drank so much, though, that we weren't hungry for supper, and I had a stomachache all night long. She told me the next day that she'd had one, too. Tall Joe said one of the pools was named Mountain men swear they get drunk after a few sips, but Pa says that's not likely, just a tall tale. Before bed, Jake and Ben complained and pushed each other all day long. Then they argued with me, and they said that it was time to when I said it was time to unroll their blankets. I am plain tired of being their sister. 2 days later. Read this one, then be done. 2 days north of the Soda Springs, the sky turned black and the air cold. In an instant, a wind picked up so fierce. I had to hold my bonnet on with both hands, even though it was tied under my chin. My skirt blew back so tight that it looked like I was wearing men's trousers. When the hail hit, we had to stop the wagons and ran for cover. The poor animals moaned and cried, but there's no way that we could protect them. It felt like somebody was pelting us with rocks, and in an instant, my arms and my neck were bruised. Hailstones bounced like popping corn, and soon the ground was white. Many of the wagon tops, ours included, ended up with holes in them. The storm passed as quickly as it started and flooded the roads so that mud sucked on their wheels as we pulled out. It was our turn to be in the lead. Because of the storm, we thought nothing of the abandoned wagon we came upon. Its cover also had holes. But when Tall Joe came back from inspecting it, his face told a different story. Folks, Those holes ain't from the hail, Tall Joe said. He held up an arrow with feathers on the end. Quickly as you please, the man began searching in case someone from the wagon was left behind. Indians had stolen their mules and whatever treasures possible, and there was a trail of scattered goods. Wade and Gideon made a gruesome discovery. About 200 yards away, inside a thicket of sagebrush, was a pair of feet sticking out of a low grave. Men's feet, we think, because they were big with hairy toes. It seems that after he was buried, they came back and dug deep enough to steal his boots, and then they left him. I thought it could have been Pa if we'd taken the shortcut. My stomach felt tight, thinking that these people might be watching us and they might not be friendly. There was some talk about digging up the poor fellow to see who he was, but Tall Joe said it wouldn't be pretty, that's for sure, and we'll likely find out when we get to Fort Hall, which is in just a few days. He and Pa shoveled some dirt to cover the poor dead man's feet, and we piled rocks on top to keep animals away. It was a very sad group of us that pulled out. Pepper and I and Wade walked together next to the wagon Gideon was driving, and we watched the horizon more, and we wondered what would happen if we saw Indians. This is a land of sagebrush and rock, much of it black. Tall Joe says it's from volcanoes, and that the western part of the continent is full of them, old volcanoes that don't erupt anymore. Our animals pull hard and slowly. They are plumb worn out. Tall Joe rides back and forth among the wagons, ordering folks to lighten their loads. Again. Some families pile belongings neatly on the side of the trail. Others just heave things out, letting them land wherever. I keep my eye on Mrs. Kinker, but she's not thrown anything away. 2 of her oxen dropped dead yesterday, 1 today. So now they have 3 pulling. Tall Joe warned her again. We'll leave you behind, madam, you and your junk and your husband. Better start tossing. Every day there are at least 2 animals to butcher, either cows, horses, or oxen. What meat we don't eat, the women cut into strips for jerky, and we hang them from the hoops inside our wagons, and the dry air toughens them pretty quick. Layers of dust seem to keep the flies and the yellow jackets away. Man. All right, my friends. See you later.